Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Philadelphia and to the Exposition of 1876, celebrating a century of progress for the United States of America. America, a century old, and, despite the ravages of civil war, united again. In some ways, however, we are not one nation, but three: the South, the North, and the West. This division, my friends, is a sign that we should review not only our great progress today, we should also consider the price we have paid. Surely the highest price of all was the bloodshed of the Civil War. More than 500,000 young men gone forever. And, of course, the South itself lay in ruins. Since then, our efforts at drawing the South back into the Union, well, those efforts have had mixed results at best. For example, only through federal pressure with federal troops were the former slaves able to vote. But now the South is returning to its old ways. I ask you, how long will our black brethren keep any freedoms at all? Oh, the entire South has suffered. It is a poor place, really. Many Southern farmers barely eke by. In sharp contrast stands the North, the proud, prosperous survivor of the long war. Once we relied on Europe for new machines. Now we build them in the North. There, factories old and new give work to our own people and to the immigrants now pushing into northern cities. Those cities, my friends, have extended their reach across the land. Today, a transcontinental railroad links the productivity of the North to the promise of the West. From New York to San Francisco, where the rails lead, people follow. Ah, but the West looks bright indeed. Still, there is a lengthening shadow out there, a shadow cast by our own deeds. For if history is any guide, our triumphs in the West will come at the expense of those who lived there long before. To my mind, their agony imposes a heavy price indeed. Oh, the price of progress has often been heavy. I cannot brush that aside. Yet if the Civil War is to have any meaning, if our westward movement is to have any great purpose, then we must come together as a single, undivided nation. You see, I believe we can learn to live together, and I hope you share my confidence. Despite our differences, ladies and gentlemen, we can be one nation. For better, for worse, for now, forever.
The wide open middle of the continent, as seen through the eyes of American settlers. Lonely, scary, unyielding. And so those settlers moved on farther west, beyond the Great Plains. The plains, a dry, treeless expanse where an unending sea of grass floated to the horizon. The plains, home of the Sioux and the Comanche and the great wild herds of buffalo. By the late 1800s, that world, that way of life was already centuries old. By 1900, it would be gone forever, swept away by a tide of new people with new technology. It began with new and better guns. Six-shooters and repeating rifles gave the United States Army a deadly advantage. To clear the way for settlement, the Army killed thousands of Native Americans and forced the rest onto reservations. Even the buffalo fell victim. In an effort to eliminate the Native Americans' food supply, the government encouraged the slaughter of the great herds. All along, the railroads were reaching out, linking the cities of the north, the new towns of the frontier, and the settled outposts of the far west. So, suddenly, the middle of the continent seemed smaller, more accessible. Ranchers moved in, and farmers drawn by the offer of free land from the government. They came into a flat, dry place unlike any they'd ever known, where trees were so scarce there wasn't wood enough for fences, where the tangled roots of grass knit the soil into a dense mat more than a foot thick. Again, technology provided some answers. Barbed wire for fences, steel plows to break through the sod. Improved well-digging machines and windmills helped too, bringing up water for people and livestock and crops. In the wide open landscape, new steam-powered reapers and threshers enabled single families to work much larger farms. And everything the farmers and ranches produced, the railroads carried to mechanized mills and slaughterhouses. In the nation's first assembly lines, cattle became sides of beef in a matter of minutes. At that rate, it took only 30 years to transform the entire middle of the continent. By 1900, a patchwork of cattle ranches and wheat farms made it the nation's most productive agricultural region. The old world, the old way of life. To the casual eye, its surrender looked complete. In human terms, the changes were almost too big to measure. Yet wild grasses had merely given way to wheat. The buffalo had only given way to cattle. And the horizon still stretched out, flat and unbounded. In its enduring, remarkable way, the landscape itself had hardly changed at all.
It's one of America's oldest stories, immigrants from afar. Drawn here by a desire for freedom, for land, for greater opportunity, and through hard work, turning that opportunity into a better life. It's an old story, and often true. Certainly often enough in the late 1800s, when immigration began to rise from a steady trickle into a flood. The story usually focuses on the immigrants, on how America changed them. What about the other way around? What about how they changed America? First, they made it more crowded. From 1870 to 1910, the population went from almost 40 million to more than 90. Nearly half that increase came from immigration. Most immigrants went to cities where the jobs were, so old cities grew, new ones developed. By 1900, more than 30 American cities had a population of over 100,000. Those cities were full of strangers, with different languages, customs, religions, with special sights and sounds and smells for every group. There were Scandinavians, Germans, Irish. There were Italians, Russians, and Chinese. There were Catholics and Jews and Buddhists. The country was becoming more varied, which led to tension, to conflict. It also meant a richer mix of people with a wealth of new ideas. American ingenuity was a source of pride, but much of that inventiveness had foreign roots. Immigrants brought fresh thoughts, wild schemes for new machines, for entire new industries, which might be where immigrants had their biggest effect. Supplying an army of workers, manufacturing goods in quantities never seen before, and in turn, creating demand for still more goods, which encouraged more industry and brought more workers. A cycle that went on, spiraling up and up. Strong backs, sturdy hands, unending toil. The basic contribution the immigrants made. Still, just one part of the story. Just the starting point for the long story of how immigrants changed America. When Mother died, I thought I would try to learn a trade. So I went to work in what they call a sweatshop, making skirts by machine. I was new at the work and made many mistakes, so that I was often called a stupid animal. But I made $4 a week by working 6 days in the week.
American industry, mightier than ever, extending its steely reach across the land. Once, the mills of New England were enough, powered by water, turning out textiles for a smaller land. That was then, this is now. 1900, the dawn of a new century, a machine age, with bigger industry than ever before, building a stronger America, its distant regions linked by the shining network of the rails. We need coal, we need oil, because all the power of New England's rivers can't meet the challenges of today. Now, we need more to fuel our powerful steam engines, to light and heat the homes of our growing population. And we need iron ore to make steel for machines, for bridges, for railroads. Steel, forged not in New England, but in Pennsylvania and the Midwest. The Midwest, where we are building the new cities of a new age. There's Pittsburgh, with steel mills so fiery and hot, it's been called hell with the lid off. And Cleveland, home office of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, and nerve center of America's petroleum industry. And Chicago, where the Armour and Swift meatpacking plants turn western cattle herds into canned lunches for workers the world over. These cities and others in the Midwest, near the new raw materials, near the new energy sources, near the shipping of the Great Lakes, tied together by the steam locomotive rushing relentlessly across the land. New, big places, richer than ever, driven by the brightest minds and strongest muscles, turning America into the industrial giant of the world.
My teacher taught me about Chicago. He lived there once and always told us about the restaurants and fancy people. He didn't mean to, but his stories made life on our farm in Iowa seem dull and, well, narrow. The chores and all. Not for my brothers. They all wanted their own farms. But the girls, those of us who didn't get married right quick, we dreamed of finer things. Nice clothes you didn't have to make yourself. High-button shoes, corsets, hats with egret feathers. Of course, Mama yearned for a sewing machine and a washer, and the men fancied tools. It got to where none of us could wait until the next Sears catalog from Chicago showed up in our new mailbox, even though we really couldn't afford to order much. But I took to reading between the lines and the pictures. There was Chicago. To me, the grandest, busiest, most sophisticated city in the world. I knew I would find a good job there, and I did, like a lot of other young people from my county who moved to the city, including boys who hated farming. Why, 3 of us girls now work for the same department store and live in the same boarding house. Sundays, we're off. If we've saved any money, we might eat out. In summer, we picnic by Lake Michigan and listen to band concerts or watch bicycle races. But what we like best is exploring our city. We know the elevated routes by heart, and a nickel takes us all over. Downtown, where the best stores are. To the Art Institute, the Federal Building, or up to the zoo. Of course, sometimes you ride through immigrant districts, where so many people live, all crowded together. To hear the talk or see the signs, you could almost be in another country, Poland or Germany or Italy. Some things in the city are not so pretty, but they're important anyway. The stockyards and meatpacking plants, the factories where they make just about everything, plows for farms, tracks for railroads, furniture and stoves for people's houses. A friend at work even told me about factories that make machines for making other machines. It could make you dizzy just thinking about it. Friends also told me about the Columbian Exposition a few years ago. It was held in 1893, about 4 centuries after Columbus sailed to America. Imagine, there was a big newfangled toy called a Ferris wheel. The first electric lights most folks had ever seen. In the grandest buildings. Everybody called it the White City. I heard tell that cities and towns all over are trying to copy it. Anyway, the stories about the exposition made me realize how important cities are. Like a nation's crown jewels, priceless and beautiful. But also like its mainsprings, making the whole country tick. I like my new life here. Of course, I miss home, Mama and Papa, my brothers and sisters, even Iowa. I write my family every week. And since I have friends in all the right places, I make sure the folks back home get their Sears catalog on time.
American industry, mightier than ever, extending its steely reach across the land. 1900, the dawn of a new century, a machine age with bigger industry than ever before, building a stronger America, stronger America, stronger America, stronger America.
Hold it. I've been looking into this, and it's fine to brag about progress. But progress has always had a price, even back then. Take those new cities they were always boasting about. The workers had to live near the factories. That could mean 1,000 people per acre. Several families in one room, some without a single window. That's not all. Sewage and waste from factories were dumped into the same rivers people drank from. Typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis. They ran rampant. Imagine, in the worst slums, nearly 1/3 of the babies never reached their first birthday. Then there was the smoke from all those factories, burning coal. In Pittsburgh, businessmen had to change their shirts twice a day. In lots of places, slaughterhouses dumped animal remains in the nearest vacant lot. Other garbage ended up right in the streets. Ruining the landscape wasn't just a city problem either. Some lumber companies cut down entire forests and never planted a single tree. Then there were the strip mines, tearing up the landscape, leaving it that way forever. And the big farms out on the Great Plains, well, they were letting that precious soil just blow away. Actually, though, it wasn't all bad news. Even back then, some people understood that the land should be protected. That progress does have a price. More often, though, that message got drowned out.
Stronger America, stronger America, stronger America. New, big places, richer than ever, driven by the brightest minds and strongest muscles, turning America into the industrial giant of the world.
That serviceable and homely product of Yankee ingenuity, the sewing machine, has helped to spread the fame of America abroad. At whatever places men have set up their markets, in whatever places the cutter and fashioner of cloth or leather or fur plies his calling, there the American sewing machine has made its way and is welcome, whether it be in the tent of the desert Arab or the Norwegian fishing village near the Arctic Circle. Up here, the view seems to go on just about forever. I guess it's one of the things I like best about being a park ranger here at Yosemite. To some, this California valley, nestled in the Sierra Nevada, well, it looks so sheltered and permanent. But I see how fragile it is, how much it needs our protection. Of course, different people have always looked at the land in different ways. Our first settlers, for instance, they saw the wilderness as an obstacle, as something to be swept away for farms and homes. They believed the land and its resources were limitless, So Americans cleared the forests wholesale, farmed so carelessly that they wore out the soil, and then just moved on. Toward the end of the 1800s, though, people were beginning to wake up. The country was filling in, putting a heavier burden on the land. So heavy that more and more people thought the land should be conserved. These people were called conservationists. But what to do? One approach was to set aside special wilderness areas to be preserved forever. The idea caught on fast. It was helped along by the beautiful paintings of the day. Anyway, our first national park, Yellowstone, was established in 1872. The government owned most of the land out here, which made it easier. Still, it was an achievement. A lot of the credit for waking people up should go to John Muir. To me, he's a hero. Roaming these same mountains, Muir saw the damage done by loggers and sheep herders and mounted a campaign against it. It worked. In 1890, Congress decided Yosemite should be a national park too. Back then, there weren't any rangers like me, so the U.S. Cavalry had to be called in to protect both Yosemite and Yellowstone from loggers and such. Muir and his followers were a special brand of conservationists. Today we call them preservationists because they wanted to preserve wilderness, to keep it wild. Other conservationists didn't agree. Gifford Pinchot, the first director of the U.S. Forest Service, believed the land should be used, not just protected. For example, he established careful guidelines for cutting timber and then planting new trees. Pinchot had powerful support. President Theodore Roosevelt. During his time in office, millions of acres of government land were set aside as national parks or forests. Most of that land saw fairly steady use. Preservation or conservation. Personally, I think both ways work. Some places are too special to change ever. Others can go through cycle after cycle of use and rebirth. Whatever the approach, people were beginning to take better care of the environment, even in the cities. They built parks, for instance, so that city dwellers would have green, open spaces to relax in. Little by little, the message got through. The land and its resources are limited. The environment needs protection. The way John Muir thought about it still makes no sense to me. He believed that nature could teach us so much, as though these very pines had something to say. Almost 100 years later, I hope we're still listening.
Something is happening here. You've got to try to understand. Everything's changed. 50 years ago, the U.S. was divided by civil war. It was a smaller country. Farms, mostly. Much of the West was still frontier. Now we're united, more urban, more industrial. The world's biggest manufacturer, ready to join the ranks of the great powers. But the other great powers had carved up the world, building trade by amassing far-flung empires. We needed access to world markets too. We wanted to sell our products everywhere. So in 1898, we went to war against Spain to break that country's hold in the Americas. Victory in the Spanish-American War brought us dominance over Cuba and Puerto Rico, with access to markets throughout the Americas and beyond. That wasn't all. The war also brought Guam and the Philippines under our control, new territories in the Pacific, vital way stations for trade with the huge markets of Asia. And when American sugar planters backed the revolt in Hawaii, we were glad to pull those islands into the fold too. Hawaii provided yet another U.S. base on the sea path to Asia. You see, don't you, that this is all adding up to something. We have acquired bits of an empire. Nothing compared to what Britain has taken, for example, but enough so that we won't be shut out by the other great powers. Enough to bring other changes too. We have always been isolated by two wide oceans, so we've always gone our own way. Now I didn't see how that can last much longer. Because more and more, we become one of many nations, less an island to ourselves. Despite our great power, we lost something. Some independence mission. The whole basis of this war, that cross independence, peace and folly, that's what we do.